Baby formula, stocked on the shelves and ready to feed a new generation. At least, it's supposed to be stocked on the shelves. Your attention might have been caught by its recent shortages, or its increasing price tag. Maybe you've even tuned in to a recall of the very stuff that's supposed to feed the most vulnerable of our society. But have you ever wondered who makes it? Or how it almost systematically ends up in your pantry? Whether you're a new parent, or a healthcare worker who prescribes baby formula, or were like me and were fed it as a baby, I hope by the end of this video, you'll have gained a little more insight into infant formula and are aware of this medical industrial complex. I don't even know what else to call it. Just like how there's a military industrial complex run by names like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, the US Department of Health is commandeered by the likes of Abbott, Mead Johnson, and Nestle. There's a deeper story to uncover here, one with a sinister trail of greed left behind these corporate giants. We live in a world where the rich prey on the poor, where the powerful exploit the weak, and where the biggest of us profit off of our smallest. Here's the story of the monopolization of baby formula. I wanted to understand why there's a monopoly for infant formula and how we got to this point. To understand this, we first need to look at the history of breastfeeding to see when things changed. Babies were usually nursed by their mothers, and in some cultures, breastfeeding was even seen as an obligation up until the 19th century. Alternatively, wet nurses were a prevalent option, though the social status of the wet nurse varied across cultures. In ancient societies, wet nurses were employed to breastfeed the children of royal families. Breastfeeding was viewed as a peasant behavior, too lowly to be done by the rich. This attitude spread to America in the 1900s. Ever seen one of those laughably bad instructional films from the 70s?
A few days or a few weeks after your baby is born, you may feel depressed. Perhaps you feel that you can't cope with all your new duties, that you're not doing enough for your baby, or that your husband doesn't show enough interest. Don't worry about these blues.
Okay, but listen closely to what they say next.
Your doctor will give you the baby's formula. It's most important that you prepare it so that it is sterile, as germs grow readily in milk.
Did you catch it? In that film, doctor-prescribed infant formula was the only option covered, and breastfeeding wasn't even mentioned. The 20th century marks a substantial shift from breastfeeding to formula feeding.
Your baby needs to be loved and knows when you're enjoying the time you spend with him. He wants to be talked to and petted. His father should have some playtime with him also, perhaps at bath time or feeding time. This makes a true family.
So why in the 1900s did we see such a dramatic shift? According to a 1973 study conducted by the National Survey of Family Growth, there was a dramatic decline in breastfeeding among American women. Within about 40 years, the percentage of firstborn infants that were breastfed dropped from 70% to 30%. Breastfeeding went from a cultural norm to something unconventional. But the study also revealed something else that I found very interesting. Not in how many women breastfed, but for how long. The number of women that breastfed their first baby for more than 3 months fell off dramatically. According to the study, less than 10% of mothers between 1966 and 1973 had breastfed their baby for 3 months or more, a substantial decline from earlier periods. Second-born babies have always been less likely than first-born babies to be breastfed. This study revealed that the attitude to view breastfeeding as uncultured or low class created meaningful social pressure for mothers to switch to formula feeding. Propaganda from the period gives us an idea to what consumers were seeing. There were advertisements that compared their brand as closest to breast milk, which is illegal today. Other advertisements made the case that by consuming their product, each of the baby's body parts would be strengthened. The decline in breastfeeding occurred in most cultural and socioeconomic groups, but was slightly greater among poor women, women of color, and women who were less educated. Infant formula was pushed in these communities heavily. You know how they pushed crack and alcohol on every block in poor communities of color? Yeah, kinda like that. If you look around nowadays, you'll see that a significant number of households buy their infant formula through WIC programs. WIC stands for Women's, Infant, and Children, and according to the USDA, the WIC program provides free healthy foods, breastfeeding support, and nutrition education to those less fortunate. WIC served about 6.6 million participants each month in 2023, including an estimated 51% of all infants in the United States. WIC was launched in 1972 in response to a growing concern that there was a lot of malnutrition in poor families. Stores and vendors apply to be included in a state's WIC list, and then families with WIC spend their benefits at that store. Ever seen a sticker on a storefront that reads, "WIC accepted here"? Yeah, that's essentially WIC in a nutshell. It basically makes healthier foods and infant formula more accessible, which is an inherently good thing. But like any government program, some people take advantage of it. Take for example a mother whose child is no longer in need of formula, but still receives benefits. Some people purchase items and formulas with WIC and then resell them for cash, typically at a lower price. The system isn't perfect by any means, but it has helped millions of families avoid malnutrition. WIC is pretty efficient at what it aims to do, and it's growing in popularity. Even though the WIC program makes buying infant formula more affordable, not every household qualifies for WIC. Many infants get their first taste of infant formula right there at the hospital when they're born. If you're wondering how your hospital got access to its supply of infant formula, or why they often provide free discharge packs, we'll expose that in a bit. But let's get back to WIC. Ask yourself this: what type of infant formula can you get with WIC? That answer depends on your state. For example, New York WIC supports a lot of the Enfamil product line manufactured by Mead Johnson Nutrition, while Pennsylvania WIC is dominated by Abbott's Similac product line. It's a bit territorial when you think about it, because these companies are chasing to win or renew government bids every 4 years to gain WIC exclusivity. But what this often means when you break it down is that if one company has their infant formula on a state's WIC approved list, it means that other companies lose access to that state's market, which inevitably results in manufacturers cornering that state's market through WIC exclusivity. Take a look at this graph of formula contracted WIC states in 2015. You could see that there were 3 companies competing for contracts: Abbott, Mead Johnson, and Nestle. But that was over a decade ago. If you look at the contracted states today, you'll only see 2 colors, and Nestle has been completely knocked out of the WIC market, resulting in a 2-company monopoly of government contracts. It's crazy to think that the industry has become so concentrated that even a large company like Nestle can't compete. Nestle's share of the US market is just under 10%, while Abbott controls 42% and Mead Johnson controls 38%. Abbott and Mead Johnson have even cornered the WIC contracts of Indian tribal organizations. I don't think I need to explain why 2 companies controlling most of the market is a recipe for disaster. Are you a low-income mother in Pennsylvania who wants to feed your baby Gerber Good Start because you heard good things about it? You're out of luck, because Nestle's Gerber product line isn't supported by Pennsylvania's WIC program. You're stuck with Abbott's Similac brand. Sometimes a state can support a portion of a company's formula line and not support another product within that same brand. If you're a New Yorker and want Abbott's Similac Advance, you're cooked, because the only Similac powder that's on the list effective November 2024 is Similac Neosure, Similac Soy Isomil, and Similac Elementum. The rest is largely Mead Johnson's Enfamil powder. You can get other Abbott products like Pediasure and Elacare, just not the Similac Advance you were looking for. This is problematic for many reasons. One of them being that every baby's needs are different, and not all formula cans are the same. One color can is designed to ease constipation in babies, such as Enfamil's Reguline, while another color might be designed for lactose sensitivity, such as Similac Sensitive, which is this orange can right here. And to be confined to a certain number of options to choose from puts a limit on the pediatric and enteral care that your child is capable of receiving from the state. But what if something catastrophic happens and you're facing a supply shock from your state's WIC-designated formula manufacturer? On February 17, 2022, the FDA announced the recall of infant formula manufactured in Abbott's plant in Sturgis, Michigan. The plant had been contaminated with salmonella and chronobacter. The coronavirus pandemic created many supply shocks, and the global supply chain was already struggling the past 5 years. So when the FDA announced the recall, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Abbott produces nearly 42% of all infant formula in the US. Contaminations happen all the time in the marketplace, but when it happened in a market with only 2 competitors, the supply shock instantly wiped out half of the supply of baby food. Lawsuits against Abbott later revealed that the company had ample notice to address its decline of safety practices, and that its non-compliance caused the shortage. But it was too late. The supply shock of infant formula collapsed a market that was already at a breaking point. Panic buying and hoarding trends that occurred during the lockdowns exacerbated the issue. Households had to check the bottom of their cans to see if the formula they had on their shelves was safe to consume, or if their shelves had to be emptied. It was like an awful game of Russian roulette for many. Some households got lucky and felt relief when they found out that their formula didn't originate from the Michigan plant. Other mothers reported extreme stress and anxiety when they had to recall every bit of formula in their household. The sudden supply shock caused people to scramble to secure a source of food for their baby, which effectively raised demand and prices of other brands of formula such as Nestle's Gerber and Mead Johnson's Enfamil. Following the recall, the price of baby formula rose by at least 10% across the board. At the same time, the formula industry's profit margin increased by 2.6 percentage points. And since then, the prices haven't gone back down. The recall exposed the dangers of a monopolized market and the risks associated with the lack of competition. Across the nation, people were furious. What followed was a series of lawsuits made by mothers and consumers against Abbott Laboratories. After the recall and shutdown of the Sturgis facility, formula out-of-stock rates spiked to 74% nationally by the end of May 2022. And by June, 10 states had out-of-stock rates at 90% or greater. The states hit the hardest were those that were Abbott-contracted states. Unfortunately, that's most of America, its territories, and Indian tribes. Some households had the ability to weather the storm and afford the price hikes. Many others weren't so lucky. There were reports of households forced to water down what little formula they had left in a desperate attempt to feed their little ones, while simultaneously trying to make ends meet. Even though it was Abbott's fault, they and the other formula manufacturers were able to benefit from the price increases, while American families suffered from Abbott's mistake. So why do we abandon breastfeeding? Does infant formula have any benefits that breast milk doesn't? Actually, it's the opposite. Aside from the obvious savings that come from not needing to buy formula for $20 or $30 a can, according to the CDC, breast milk shares antibodies from the mother with her baby, which helps babies develop a strong immune system and protect them from illnesses. Breastfed babies have a lower risk of asthma, obesity, type 1 diabetes, and sudden infant death syndrome. They're also less likely to have ear infections and stomach bugs. Breastfeeding can also be more convenient. Mothers can feed their babies on the go without worrying about having to mix formula or prepare bottles. There's even some research that suggests that breastfeeding can reduce the mother's risk of breast and ovarian cancer, type 2 diabetes, and high blood pressure. The CDC recommends exclusive breastfeeding for about the first 6 months. And some religious texts, such as the Quran, mention breastfeeding up until 2 years of age and then weaning the child afterwards. Even on the cans of infant formula, the manufacturers state that breast milk is recommended. So why do hospitals rush to feed newborns with formula? First, we need to go back and answer that question of how hospitals get access to their supply of baby formula. Manufacturers like Abbott or Mead Johnson, they don't sell directly to the hospital. Hospitals have to get it through a medical distributor like Cardinal Health or McKesson, who happen to be some of the biggest companies in America, by the way. They act as the middleman, and Mead Johnson, and especially Abbott, like to push their product in massive trucks to these companies who pay to distribute them. It's quite literally a controlled medical cartel. If you want access to the game, you're pretty much gonna have to buy shares. It turns out that manufacturers encourage hospital staff to provide discharge packs of formula, sometimes for free. At first, I thought it was so that babies can get a taste of their product and get hooked, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Infant formula isn't addictive to the baby, and pediatric doctors claim they don't get paid to promote it. It may not be the babies that are addicted to the formula, but the parents, as a result of the formula industry's marketing campaign in hospitals. Parents are made to believe that the formula is more convenient to prepare, and since they get it for free or have it covered by insurance, they're manipulated into thinking that the hospitals and the industry are acting in the parents' best interest. But in reality, if it's free, then you're the product. The industry knows that eventually the parents will have to restock, and we all know who that will benefit in the end. There's a huge gap between the research and the industry's practices. The National Library of Medicine is even quoted saying that commercial hospital discharge packs are one of several factors that influence breastfeeding duration and exclusivity. The distribution of these packs to new mothers at hospitals is part of a long-standing marketing campaign by formula manufacturers, and it implies hospital and staff endorsement. They even go as far to say that hospital discharge pack distribution should be reconsidered in light of its negative impact on exclusive breastfeeding. And don't be fooled into thinking that the corruption is only happening in America. A paper written by the World Health Organization and UNICEF reveals that the shady marketing of formula is happening globally. Companies use a variety of tactics to advertise their formula in both public and private spaces. This includes offering free samples and even the use of data-driven algorithms that target digital advertising to women whose online behavior suggests that they may be pregnant. A mother in China reported, "After I gave birth to him, I didn't know who leaked the information. The ad person or others would send me one pack. They seem to be fighting for the first sip of formula milk." Companies also weaponize fear and the anxiety of parents to convince them that they would be better parents if they were to choose their brand of formula milk. Sometimes the companies advertise how their product is more premium simply because it is more expensive. A mother in South Africa reported, "I know it sounds bad, but my mommy instinct took over and I wanted the most expensive because I'm making up for not breastfeeding her." Companies also make their products come across as superior due to the use of scientific acronyms and terms. A mother in Mexico admitted, "I'd think that all those scientific acronyms like DHA give a feeling of scientific sophistication. You don't know what it is, but it sounds cool." Some companies even use doctors to promote their products, and they abuse the trust that people have with their medical community. That same mother in Mexico stated, "I find those advertisements more reliable when there's someone with a white lab coat." All in all, the whole operation is contradictory, because even though manufacturers directly mention how breastfeeding is superior to formula on the cans, manufacturers and hospitals still rush to supply newborns with formula so that families can get a taste of their product. It almost sounds like organized drug crime, with dealers giving free samples because they know that you're gonna get hooked and keep coming back for more. It'd almost be funny if it weren't for the victims being minutes old, their lifetime less than the runtime of this video. So where am I going with all this? Do I want people to hate baby formula? No, of course not. As I mentioned earlier, formula is something that I needed in my own life, but I am against the idea of pinning mothers to believe that they don't have a choice. I'm against the idea of corporate America taking control over something as natural as nursing. If you get one thing out of this video, let it be this. It is dangerous, reckless, and irresponsible to put the supply of baby food into the hands of two companies. Everyone should have the freedom to choose what's best for them, whether that be opting to breastfeed or choosing a safe and accessible formula that's right for them. But what we have right now is a system built to benefit companies, not the choices of families. And for now, feeding time might just have to wait until they restock the shelves.